I've been able to confirm through IDF sources that the DNA test was a match, that this is Yahya Sinwar who was killed here. Well, within the last few hours, the news breaking, actually an image circulating first online showing what appeared to be Yahya Sinwar. And the initial reaction was matching what appeared to be the same ear features, a similar mole to the right of the eye, and the same teeth on a man who was killed today inside the Gaza Strip. Pictures of Israeli soldiers around this body, mangled inside of the wreckage of the partially collapsed building around him, most of the body covered by rubble, but his head exposed. And immediately the face, the facial features look like Yahya Sinwar. We then start to hear that IDF ground forces who had engaged in this area at the time were telling their higher ups that they think that they had found the body, that they'd killed Sinwar. That set in motion the effort by the IDF to bring the body inside Israel for DNA testing. And within the last hour and a half, I've been able to confirm through IDF sources that the DNA test was a match, that this is Yahya Sinwar who was killed here. This appears that it was entirely incidental. We're hearing that the IDF soldier who was firing on the building at the time wasn't even in uniform on October 7th last year, that these are young 18, 19-year-old soldiers who had initially identified 3 men that they considered targets, combatants, and that they fired on the building that they were in. And it was only until they went inside the building and started to clear that they identified the bodies and realized that they might have just killed Sinwar. So this was, by all accounts, not an intentional effort by the IDF to target Sinwar. The last year, the Israelis have been telling us that Sinwar is in the deepest, darkest part of the Gazan tunnel network, that he's surrounded by hostages, and that they didn't believe he'd been emerging above ground the duration of this conflict, that he had entirely holed up inside this tunnel network. So it potentially calls into question some of that intelligence, whether he had been above ground at certain points throughout the last year, and that was not caught. But Sinwar, as a man, his story intertwines with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in remarkable ways. 61 years old, he was born in Han Yunis. His parents fled from what is now the Israeli town of Ashkelon during the Nakba, which is a displacement of tens of thousands of Palestinians from what is now Israeli territory into the Palestinian territories, into the Gaza Strip, into the West Bank, where he was born in Khan Yunis back in 1962. This is a man who has been arrested multiple times by the Israelis. At one point in the 1980s, he was arrested on 4 counts of life sentences for murder. He was accused of murdering not just Israelis, but Palestinians as well, that he believed were co-conspirators or collaborators with the Israelis. So he was killing Palestinians, and he was serving life sentences for killing those Palestinians when he was exchanged ultimately in 2011 for a lone Israeli soldier who had been captured. And the exchange, him and dozens of others were then taken or were then freed from Israeli jails and exchanged in this prisoner swap. But the Israelis at one point actually saved Sinwar's life. Back in 2004, he had a brain tumor while he was in prison. He was taken to Israeli hospitals. They removed the brain tumor and saved his life. So a remarkable story intertwines his life before he becomes the Hamas military commander, intertwines with all these moments here between the Israelis and the Palestinians for decades. Well, the questions now are whether or not we're going to see any sort of movement politically, militarily within Hamas that would show signs of an end to this conflict. By all accounts, Hamas is at this point, a year on, battered, just absolutely wrecked in some areas of their former capacity. They can't carry out these large-scale rocket attacks on Israel anymore like they could for years and years. And in those initial days of this war starting last October, Hamas was firing hundreds, thousands of rockets into Israeli territory. The last rocket attack we had was just one. in the last 2 weeks. So the question going forward: where does this put Hamas as a organization that already lost Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader, the elected leader of the organization, when he was killed in a bombing in Tehran back in July? Sinwar elevated to a new role where he was more than just the military commander of Hamas. He was also the de facto elected leader of the political wing as well. The organization is, by all accounts, in tatters, but it's an organization that still holds about 100 hostages, right? It was believed that Sinwar was the man who was preventing any sort of hostage deal, continuing to rebuff the Qataris, the Americans, the Egyptians, saying that he won't give up these hostages at this stage of the war. So where does that stand, I think, is the big question here. The Hostage Families Forum has released a message within the last hour saying they welcome this news of Sinwar's elimination. Obviously, the man who's responsible for these hostages being taken into Gaza in the first place last October 7th. But they're calling now for this moment to be taken, captured. The Hostage Families Forum is saying, let's use this moment to attempt to get a deal done, to retrieve the remaining hostages and end this war. But again, who is going to possibly be involved with Hamas's efforts to negotiate at this point to be able to get some of those hostages out? The time will certainly tell. I'm sure we are in a moment now where Israeli leadership sees this as an opportunity to end the Hamas conflict, which they were already seeing some off ramps in the last several weeks. They would not have launched this operation against Hezbollah. They would not be in southern Lebanon right now if they didn't feel confident that the situation inside Gaza was in their favor. The interesting elements here, as you'd mentioned, is that Israel, I know we talk about the big names of the Hassan Nasrallahs, the Mohammed Defs, the Yahya Sinwars, the Ismail Haniyehs who have been killed over the last 4 months. But the structure of these organizations, how they delegate leadership to field commanders and intelligence officers and different elements of this leadership tree, so many other names that haven't been major breaking news have been killed over the duration of this conflict. Names wanted terrorists by the United States, by Britain, by Israel. Men who have been on these terror watch lists for decades have been falling frequently on a weekly basis in Hezbollah and in Hamas over the last year. So these organizations right now, Israel has had an incredible amount of success slimming down the list of names of people who they wanted to kill for decades. But what does that do still to the structure of these organizations when we know that these are still massive groups with tens of thousands, especially Hezbollah, tens of thousands of men across Lebanon that proudly wear that flag and hold the patch and are willing to go fight in southern Lebanon? At this point, we don't have anything, and I should note that we don't have any recorded rocket attacks either from Hamas or from Hezbollah within the last 2 hours. I think that's an interesting element here. Just based on the history of the conflicts, between Israel, often there's been some major moments when political prisoners die, when even when main Palestinian leaders die of natural causes, there have been attacks or major rocket launches. We haven't seen that since this news was handed down. There's still, of course, the potential that as the sun sets here, that there will be attempted rocket attacks from Hezbollah, who's been firing daily, or an attempted rocket attack from Hamas, although their capabilities, their capacity to do so at this point appears to have been greatly diminished. We don't see anything out of Tehran just yet. That will be the big fish here that we'll certainly pay very close attention to. But this is in such a precarious state right now because the main concern is would there be some Israeli retaliatory strike on Iran? We're more than 2 weeks past Iran's massive ballistic missile launch, more than 180 ballistic missiles fired into Israel. Israel saying it would respond in the last 48 hours. The news that we've been following is that the Israeli response, according to U.S. officials, had already been determined, that they know what targets they're going to strike. Just last night, an Iranian spokesperson for Iran's Atomic Energy Agency said that they don't believe Israel's going to strike their nuclear targets, and that if they did strike these nuclear targets, that it wouldn't cause any damage, that Iran's nuclear program is ready for all eventualities. But we don't know at this point what's about to come next, other than we do believe that an Israeli response retaliatory strike on Iran is incoming. It's the holiday here. It's the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, which ends tomorrow night. So most people are not working. Most businesses are closed until tomorrow night, including a lot of elements of the Israeli government. However, we see an incredible amount of movement within the Israeli government right now behind the scenes, especially on the military side within the IDF. So we've been told that an Israeli response to Iran could come at any moment, but we've been told that for 2 weeks. So we're seeing some signs that show that a retaliatory response is expected. One of those major signs is that the U.S. has supplied a THAAD air defense system into Israel. We've just seen some images of that system here deployed. It involves dozens of American soldiers on the ground here in Israel to operate this America's most advanced ballistic missile, anti-ballistic missile and air defense system. And it was widely believed, and based on conversations I've had, that the U.S. would not be deploying a system like this unless they felt that whatever exchange of blows is about to come next between Israel and Iran could lead to the potential of that system being highly necessary.